We have got some amazing panels coming up, but first we've got our final fireside chat. So we're going to bring Amanda and Gary to the stage, and they're going to be talking about creating a memorable fashion experience in Unreal Engine. So I can see Amanda there. Hi, welcome.
Hi, how's it going?
Yeah, not bad, thank you. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. And we've got Gary here as well.
Yeah, so before I let you both start, I just wanted to remind everyone, please do throw your questions into the Q&A and I will come along at the end and we'll go through any questions. But for now, don't worry about the time. I know we went a little over, but you've got the full time, so use as much of it as you want. So I'll drift off into the background and I'll join you for some question and answers at the end.
Thank you.
Great. Yeah, so welcome everyone. Thanks for joining this fireside chat. My name is Amanda Cosco. I'm the founder of Electric Runway. Electric Runway has been covering the intersection of fashion and technology since 2015, and I've had the opportunity to travel around the world talking about the different ways that technology is disrupting the fashion industry. So my ears were sort of burning when Morgan was talking about Roblox delving more into fashion. And I'm pleased to be joined here today with Gary James McQueen, who is a digital artist. He's also the nephew of the late Alexander McQueen. And we're here today to talk about the metaverse that he has created in the form of a fashion film that was created in Unreal Engine. There was a lot of different stakeholders as well as many different aspects to this digital fashion show. So we're going to get right into it. How's it going, Gary?
Yeah, good, thanks. Yeah,
good.
Nice and sunny here in Essex.
Great. Yeah, you're based in London.
Just outside London, yeah.
In Essex, that's right. Yeah. So, I mean, because the Beyond Games Summit is a primarily gaming audience, let's give some context to who your uncle was. Alexander McQueen, I think, would probably be referenced by most as one of the most iconic British fashion designers. Am I doing that justice? How would you describe him?
Yeah, iconic, I guess, experimental as well. You know, he is as much an artist as he was a fashion designer. You know, that's very apparent in the shows that he put on as well, where he was pushing the boundaries of technology. Even, you know, 10 years ago, using like holograms and robots and all kinds of things to kind of build immersive experiences, you know. And he was very much based as a storyteller, you know, with the shows that he created. It was all part of creating this larger storytelling narrative, you know. And that's something that I've kind of inherited myself, is love of storytelling. So I use lots of different things to, you know, create these stories. Most recently using Unreal Engine, you know, to create something quite immersive, and it just allowed me that freedom really to create an entire universe for people to kind of step into in that sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I imagine if Alexander McQueen was around today, he would be fascinated by all of the new technology that's out. So, you know, McQueen, he didn't go to school traditionally. He went to work on Savile Row. He started his own brand and then eventually became the designer at some prominent labels. And you were his apprentice, so to speak. So you sort of got your feet wet alongside him.
Yeah. Well, I didn't study fashion, you know, I studied graphic design, and I've got quite a varied background. When I graduated design college, I guess, I went straight into publishing first of all, and I started on a very low wage, and I was there for 3 years and learned all the aspects of sort of printing process more than anything. You know, how to create high resolution for starters, how that works. You know, more about the quality and the software in use. So it was, you know, a Quark Express back then for page layout, Photoshop and Illustrator. And when that went into liquidation, I found myself out of work, and then the position come open at Alexander McQueen. So I was given the opportunity to go into Alexander McQueen as a textile designer, and I didn't have a clue about fashion, but I soon learned how to apply my skills in a different way. You know, I've always been very artistic from a young age. You know, back in the early days when I was little, and Lee used to babysit me, Alexander McQueen used to babysit me. You know, we used to watch the horror films together. and I drew inspiration from that. So it was drawing characters and things like that. You know, I was very interested in special effects, like the makeup and stuff like that, behind the scenes stuff. And the way that my uncle did things was all of that, you know, in one industry. So it was the makeup, the costumes, you know, creating characters and worlds, you know, with your shows.
Yeah.
So especially specifically in that environment, you know, I found my feet.
Yeah, and creating textile design is kind of a logical extension maybe of graphic design, but you get to actually wear it in the world. So in addition to designing for the House of Alexander McQueen, you also have your own silk scarves that you've created, as well as a collaboration with Fabergé. So all this to say that you're a digital artist in your own right, but what I think will be most interesting to this audience is this recent project that you did in collaboration with Unreal Engine. So you're actually the recipient of a Epic Games mega grant. And you have been commissioned to create this metaverse in which you've built your first fashion collection. Is that a fair explanation of it?
Yeah, pretty much it in a nutshell, yeah. No, so basically the way that it worked, luckily we did secure that Epic Games Mega Grant, which gave me, you know, the funding and resources to actually create my first collection. Up until then, I hadn't, you know, to create a physical collection in the real world costs a lot of money, you know, when you consider different sizing and fabrication and all that stuff involved in that. So having that opportunity to create, I always knew that I could, but I never had, you know, the resources to prove that I can create a collection until that came along. But I've always sort of toyed with the idea of the 3D world and what the possibilities with Unreal Engine and using that software to create that experience. You know, probably up to like 10 years ago, I started using like ZBrush to digitally sculpt my prints, which, you know, you just mentioned the Fabergé one that was created through a 3D, basically, essentially it's a 3D sculpture, the whole thing, the whole print. And then I produce a 2D render within Keyshot, and that becomes the 2D artwork that's printed onto the silk, you know, and textiles these days. So I've adapted to that way, you know, as far as 10 years ago, really, which is quite forward thinking in terms of the fashion industry. Before that, it was obviously Photoshop and photo bashing, where you kind of scan pictures and then manipulate them to create something new. And that's kind of advanced into that. And that's led me further on with the understanding of that 3D world into the use of Unreal Engine and, you know, 3D assets within that environment.
Yeah, and we've certainly seen a lot of interesting things happen in Unreal Engine, but I think yours is the first kind of major fashion show to use Unreal Engine to show off not only clothing, not only the textiles, but also what a fashion show can be. As you mentioned earlier, traditionally producing a fashion show is quite expensive. You have to hire models, makeup artists, you know, the whole gamut. So being able to have an untethered imagination inside this metaverse must have been quite liberating, but a little bit of a learning curve as well, because as I understand it, you were sort of new to the technology.
Yeah, well, certain aspects of it gets quite technical. You know, there's a certain pipeline that you have to develop going through it, and we was doing everything because we went through the whole process, you know, and was figuring that out at the same time as I was building the actual fashion collection and developing the collection itself. So, you know, there's certain things that you come across, like we couldn't use Clo 3D, we had to use Marvelous Designer because of certain compatibility issues. You've also got to know how traditional fashion translates in that digital space when you're animating the cloth and things like that, because it's not as straightforward. You have to experiment a lot as well. You know, it's not just like saying, I want that to be silk, and then it's just like magically going to flow like silk and stuff like that. You know, it's troubleshooting as you go through that process. And then also we used Substance Designer as well for the textiles, like the fabrics themselves, because I wanted to create something that was pushing the limits of, you know, the realism on the fabrics themselves. So I managed to find a really great assistant who come from the 3D furniture background actually, and interiors, and I could see how that could translate as well into fashion, obviously. And she was great, and she helped me produce the textiles, the animations that were done in Marvelous Designer initially. So we did run all the animations in Marvelous Designer, and then once they were all animated, we brought those into the environment, which was actually quite a complex set. You know, it consisted of the tower where the models spiral out of, and then onto a platform, and then back into the tower again. So
yeah, so for people who haven't seen it, let's just describe it. And if they want to watch the full video after, they certainly can at GaryJamesMcQueen.com, and I highly encourage them to. But the metaverse that you designed was essentially a Tower of Babylon on the Sanskrit desert sort of experience. Is that
yeah,
an accurate description, I'd say?
I don't know. I guess I'll bring a lot of different concepts together to try and create something new. So even though it's, you know, it's got a Babylonian feel to it, it's also got a futuristic feel to it. So that's almost a bit time travel-y and quite current, you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's also quite a diverse collection as well, because it's split equally between men's and women's wear, and also sports pieces and lifestyle pieces in there, and then some show pieces as well, you know. And
yeah, so there's 20 looks in total, and they are all displayed by these virtual models that walk around the tower and then sort of out into the universe, and they basically show the collection. But it's not just the set and the models, it's also the whole film itself that gets to zoom in on some of the details and really show you the textiles and the movement.
That's another example of the freedom you have within Unreal Engine, you know, because once we'd set up those animations and they're just running their course within that environment, we've then got the freedom in real time, I guess, to place the cameras, movement of the cameras within that environment, and then really sort of art direct on the cinematography, you know. And for me, it was always more about creating like a small cinematic experience rather than a boring catwalk show, if you like, you know. And for me, it's like very important, like, to get the music that I wanted as well, because the visuals in my mind when I was building it were always based around the flow of the music as well.
Yes, you know? The music is stunning. Where did the music come from?
That's from Tiho, music artist called Tiho, and he's got this really nice balance in a lot of his music where it's got this kind of ancient and tribal feel. But then
I loved it.
Got a futuristic element to it as well, and just fitted in perfectly, you know. So
I loved it. So in addition to the fashion film, which people can watch on your website, it's streamed live on YouTube, but it's still available to go watch, of course. There was also a virtual showroom that you can drop into and observe the looks up close, which is interesting because that's not something you can normally do in a fashion show. It's usually they walk down the runway and then they're gone, and you have to wait until the items are for sale. So in the virtual showroom, you can drop in, you can examine the items in detail, and there's also an augmented reality feature. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously for everything starts quite high res when you're modeling the clothes and the assets, you know. I actually created the sneakers and the shoes myself. I modeled them myself, and there's certain accessories like goggles and helmets, and all this stuff starts at, even the advertiser did actually, but this stuff always starts at quite high res, and then it has to be downgraded a bit so it can be animated, you know. If it was like a still image that was trying to create, you know, just a nicely composite still image, then we could have kept it high, but we had to downgrade everything to an extent so it could be animated, and then that needs to be applied when it comes to the augmented reality as well, and in that showroom experience, because that immersive showroom, that VR showroom, is actually rendered within Unreal Engine, so it's not actually true 3D if you like. It's kind of shots of the environment, and then as you move around it, you get that impression of a 3D environment. But yeah, I thought, I think, especially within the fashion industry, there's a demand for transparency these days and inclusivity, and I thought that's just a really nice way of bringing people backstage so they can see, like, there's the behind the scenes. It shows some of my mood boards, how I kind of bring ideas together to create the whole story. There's art in there as well. I do sculpture and I do lenticular artworks as well. But yeah, the clothes themselves, to have the clothes available within 24 hours, which are available through DressX. So what we do is people can choose something to wear. They can send in an existing photo of themselves to DressX, and then that 3D clothing is then composited onto them. But they use the HDR lighting and the environments of the photo, the existing photo, to match it, so it matches well. And yeah, you get that back within 24 hours, so it's that concept of wearing off straight off the catwalk, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. See now, buy now, which is a huge trend in the fashion industry. So in the actual showroom, you have the opportunity to, kind of peruse the collection, but then you can also bring an item into your own environment in augmented reality. So if I wanted to point my phone somewhere in my living room and drop one of the outfits there so that I could observe it in that way. And that's because you already had the 3D asset created for the fashion film. So why not let people interact with it in a more intimate way?
Exactly. I mean, we worked with a company called Myosa Media, who have got like great experience with creating gallery experiences in the VR sense, and that augmented reality as well for different industries. And this was the first time that they did anything like this for the fashion industry, and that AR aspect is a great element, in terms of being able to look at the clothes up close and see the details, inside your own home.
Yeah, and I think yours was the first digital fashion show where you could actually wear the items straight away. As you mentioned, you paired up with DressX, which is the sort of Farfetch of digital fashion, so that anything that you saw on the runway, you could essentially wear on your social media feeds via a photo within 24 hours after purchasing it. So it's a totally different experience from the traditional fashion industry, where normally you see items on the runway and then they're not available in retail stores until 3 or 6 months later down the line, because fashion's always showing ahead of season. So this is a truly direct to consumer experience, but it's more direct to avatar experience. So I'm curious to know how you imagine that direct to avatar experience, where it goes from a fashion designer into a metaverse. Like, how will that process happen in the future? Do you imagine to be designing for games? Do you imagine that your outfits can live in different metaverses and not just the one you created?
I think they can become collectible garments, maybe, for virtual events. So you start building up an archive of digital garments, collector's items, maybe even. There's different aspects to it, I guess. I think the set itself can be used in different ways. We had a really interesting trip to the Outernet actually a couple of weeks ago, and when you look at a traditional fashion show, the set goes up and there's a lot of wastage in the materials used to put that physical fashion show on for 20 minutes. And what we've created in that digital space can be taken forward for, virtual concerts using specifically the technology that I saw in the Outernet. You can really combine new technology with the Unreal Engine environments and combine that with like a physical performance, So there's lots of different aspects going forward. I think the next generation, like my son's age, who's 14, that plays Fortnite and Call of Duty and all that stuff, I think they'll relate to the avatar side of things a bit more, because that generation really customize their avatars to sort of self-identify and express themselves. And I think that'll be something that might translate into more mainstream as we go forward as well, you know.
I certainly hope so. I mean, we've sort of seen over this past year the blurring of lines between fashion and gaming, and I hope to see it, you know, even more. And I hope to see a future where you can truly customize your avatar and truly customize your shopping experience in the same way. So I want to see fashion borrow more from gaming so that it does become more sustainable.
Yeah, at the moment
inclusive.
It's kind of the other way around. Do you know what I mean? It's more the gaming industry borrowing from fashion. And I think it's mainly because the fashion industry doesn't understand enough about the digital space without relying on third parties, you know, to carry their vision through.
Yeah.
I've been in a unique position because I understand both worlds quite well. So I didn't have to, I could keep creative control all the way through, you know, to make sure that everything translated, because I know what's possible and what isn't. If somebody says, oh, we can't do that, I'll know the answer, kind of thereabouts. Do you know what I mean? And I'll problem solve it and have a hand in it. So I can see how most fashion designers are a little bit scared of that space. But I think it's a really powerful tool that could be implemented in different stages of the design process as it is, you know, just going through our pipeline and the process of this digital show. I can really see like sustainable aspects to, you know, the fabric development stages and sampling where this can be implemented in those stages, and also through to the photo shoots, you know, for editorial photo shoots, taking that concept of what Dress X does. We can implement this 3D clothes into a bigger setup, working with a photographer on the art direction, and then combining that with the 3D clothes, you know, so there's a lot less need for traveling, fittings and other issues that arise with having clothes on set in a photo shoot, you know. I think that will open up more possibilities as well.
I think so as well. And I saw on your Instagram, you were sharing some sort of behind the scenes of creating this prior to the launch on the 25th of April. And you're using motion capture suits. Was that for the movements of the body, or what were the mocap suits for?
Yeah, so the idea was I was trying to create diversity and inclusivity, you know, so I used, and there was also, you know, budget issues with creating like human skin and subsurface scattering would have, you know, if you can't do it really well, then I'd rather avoid it. Also, I use statues, but I decided to make them, you know, out of different materials, and that was my idea of diversity. But the mocap data, yeah, we used 2 real-life models that were shot in the mocap suits, and then that data was transferred onto the rigged avatars to breathe life into them, obviously, and I had very specific choreography in mind, specifically relating to the set, you know, the models coming out of the tower, turning, going around the platform, the circles of the tower, and then coming onto the platform. So I think there's about 150 plus animations that we had to create from that data, which was a lot. And there's a lot more on top because, you know, there was some issues with arms colliding with the clothes within Marvelous Designer. So if there's anybody who knows anything about Marvelous Designer who could help us with that in future, that would help. And we had to readjust the arms so they didn't collide with the clothes. You know, you had to pull the clothes off rather than pushing them. So
arms and legs are pesky. Limbs are pesky in the metaverse, aren't they? In terms of getting it right.
The legs as well. The legs were too. If the legs were too close together, you know, it was colliding, and the legs were coming through. You know, if you had like a bodysuit on or something like that, the legs would come through. So that was quite frustrating, you know. But we found ways around it.
Yeah. I realize that we're at the 20-minute mark, so I want to go to questions, leave some time for questions. But if people want to go and check out the show one more time, it's available at GaryJamesMcQueen.com. That's where they can watch the fashion film proper, as well as drop themselves into the virtual showroom and explore the collection in more detail. So thank you so much, Gary, and I will hand it over to Sophia to help moderate some questions.
Yes, yes, thank you. Fascinating. And we've got time for a few questions. So I'm just going to pick out some here at random, I suppose. So we'll start with Jamie, who's asked, have you used virtual environments to decide, oh, it's moved. There you go. Have you used virtual environments to decide whether to take them into full production? As in, users can see new designs virtually via a super realistic version. If yes, what are the advantages to this? So I think this means like a concept staging, but using virtual reality. So rather than actually creating physical concepts, you're creating virtual concepts to see if you want to push that to production.
We're talking about creating virtual physical clothes off the back of the digital show.
That's how I take it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I approached it in a split way again. In that sense, I used 50% of the show. I used traditional pattern cutting, which was then brought into Marvelous Designer and traced out in there. So that was taking physical paper patterns, which are scanned in A4 sections, which is tedious as hell, and then pieced back together in Photoshop, which were then taken into Marvelous. And then 50% of it was created purely in Marvelous Designer to start with. I think it would be interesting. What I realised going through it is that there isn't really the tailoring skills within the digital space yet with the people that use Marvelous Designer to want. I don't think you'd get the cuts and all that at this point unless somebody has really got that skill set of traditional tailoring, you know. And that's just one thing that I think needs to be incorporated into learning curriculums within the fashion industry, more specifically. But yeah, the pieces that were pattern cut traditionally, you know, I'd have no issues about creating the clothes, the physical clothes from that. Another aspect of the way that I approached it was that I didn't move the pinpoint too far away from what's achievable in reality in terms of the textures and the kinds of clothes that they were, the cuts. You know, even though there's a lot of metal and gold and stuff like that, that can easily be translated in different ways. You know, it could be like woven jacquards or be silk or some other kind of fabrication replicates metal. But I think it does help to push the limits of what you want to achieve within the traditional fashion. You know, it inspires to push the boundaries and fabric sourcing and stuff like that to start with, you know, so you're not limited. It's showing what you want to achieve already.
Yeah, and just to give some context to what's happening in the fashion industry at large, digitization is happening, and it's happening in the supply chain very much so, in the sense that samples used to be sent physically from, you know, North America to China and back again in order for people to approve the process. But that process is happening more and more digitally now. And if you look at, for example, what Li and Feng is doing with their digital sampling program, it's incorporating more and more virtual reality so that you can shorten your speed to market. And as Gary was saying, even with another part of the pipeline, which is on model imagery, that is being digitized as well, so that you can go more quickly from ideation to production to selling in a streamlined process without having all of this shipping and all of this back and forth between manufacturers in different countries. So digitization is definitely happening in the fashion industry. It's just slower than you would expect because it's such an old, clunky industry, as Gary knows.
Yeah, and we'll fit in a few more questions, but the next one is two people have asked a similar thing, so I've sort of combined them. Is are you yourself looking at NFTs? And then someone has sort of also followed up with, how does the rising popularity of NFTs affect the virtual clothing industry? Do you see more designers branching out into NFT sales?
Yeah, I think the way that I thought of this collection really is as digital NFTs. It's something that I'm just recently learning about, you know, and it's a bit of a minefield in my mind, the whole thing. But I think it's about creating something that's a collectible more than anything within that market, you know. So if I was going to make the collection available as NFTs, it would be as, you know, collectible items, which could potentially be one of a kind. you know, so just to keep its value up. But there has been this long-standing problem, being a digital artist myself, is being taken seriously, like digital art being taken seriously as real art, you know. So I think there's some real benefits to that NFT system, where you do get that recognition that you deserve as an artist, you know, because there's a lot of digital artists out there who, you know, have you know, been pushed back by the traditional thinking.
Yeah. And I think it's also interesting that like Artifact, for example, just got a huge funding round from Andreessen Horowitz to help produce their digital collectibles. So it seems that at least Silicon Valley is paying attention.
Yeah. And I'll fit in one last question. And so Sophie has asked, where do you think designer fashion fits into the digital world, whether that's through games or the metaverse? Where do you think, sorry, I broke my own question up there. Where do you think designer fashion fits into the digital world, whether that's through games or the metaverse, where it's a more level playing field as things such as fabric and texture quality aren't part of the process? So do you think this is something that can be more mainstream within the digital world because of that? Or do you think it's still something that will be, you know, require that high sort of fashion skill level of people from the fashion industry traditionally?
I think what having the digital skills allows you to do is to experiment. Do you know what I mean? So you can really, everybody gets that opportunity, no matter, you know, what your skill level is, to learn. You know, I'm self-taught with everything that I do, and I've learned so much online myself. Well, pretty much everything, actually, a lot of YouTube videos and stuff. But yeah, I think, you know, everybody's becoming so creative these days with all the access to the tools available, that it just depends how you apply it. And it's just really interesting to see that grow, you know, and how people implement the tools and use them. And, you know, a traditional way of thinking about one piece of software or tool and how it's used, it just takes one person to use it differently, and it just pushes things in a different direction now, which is really exciting as well.
Yeah, and actually, yeah, no, definitely. And I am going to fit in one last question, because I think it's a nice way to end as well. Is how do we help the fashion industry understand more about games and interactive media? What's that? What do you think is that bridge? I just thought that was a really nice way to end. So
yeah, I don't know. I think
throw that one in.
I think it's a generation thing more than anything as well. You know, it's the younger generation. Well, it's not even the next generation. It's like my kids anyway. Really understand it, you know, and know how to use it. It's that inclusivity, everybody sort of creating together. I don't know, do you want to add anything, Amanda, to that?
Yeah, well, I think that it's a symbiotic relationship. So gaming needs to learn some stuff from fashion, and fashion needs to learn some stuff from gaming. So I think gaming can take from fashion the sort of the movement of the human body, which isn't 100% yet in gaming. The experiential nature of runway shows, the editorial nature of magazine shoots, all of these need to be conveyed in the metaverse some way. But I think that equally, fashion needs to take the very thing that Gary was speaking about from the gaming industry, this idea of being open source and collaborative. These are not traditionally, being open source and collaborative is not the way that the fashion industry is right now, to put it politely. Everyone kind of keeps their cards close to their chest in terms of who their suppliers are, et cetera. So I think that fashion really needs to learn how to be more open source and collaborative, and embrace digitization, because this is the way things are heading.
Yeah. I don't think nothing's going to totally replace the other. Do you know what I mean? They'll coexist, and you'll take little bits from each industry. But we're always going to need clothes. But I just think there's tools that you can implement from that digital pipeline into the process of traditional fashion, you know, and development.
Yeah. Well, fantastic. Well, thank you to both of you for being here. Thank you, Gary, for imparting your experiences and wisdom, and thank you, Amanda, for offering your experience as well, and for leading the conversations. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
No, thank you for being here. It's been a pleasure. Really fascinating talk, and we could tell because there was questions coming in left, right, and centre. So to everyone in the audience, if I didn't get to ask you a question, I'm really sorry about that.
Yeah, but you can follow up with us, and be sure to check out Gary's show on his site.
I'm on Instagram as well. My Instagram's got quite a lot on there as well, with Gary James McQueen Official. And, you know, if people message me, I usually get back to them. So if there are any questions, they can shoot at me in there.
Fantastic. Awesome. Well, thank you both so much. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the show. And yeah, thank you.
See ya.